Representative Jenny Graham from Spokane's 6th District, here to talk with Kelly and Angie about the murder of their family members and friends concerning Timothy Pauley and his pending release if there's not some sort of intervention that happens. I think maybe to lead off from here, because there may be some people that don't really know what happened with your situation, maybe just like a quick, just an idea of what happened and, what brought you here today as far as being, crime victims navigating our justice system, and how you feel that you've been treated by the justice system, by maybe different hearings that we might have had here at Olympia. Do you feel you're being heard? Do you feel you're being seen? Do you feel like your family matters?
I can try to describe the incident or the robbery and murders that happened back in June of 1980. Our father, Dowell, was a night manager for a small tavern in the Tukwila SeaTac area. He was at the tavern after closing with two other employees, Sherry Beckham and Robert Pierre. Our mother, Margaret Dowell, was there, as well as Robert's girlfriend, Linda. They were all helping our father close up for the evening. There was a knock at the tavern door. Whatever was said by Timothy Pauley and Scott Smith, our father opened the door and they immediately pushed their way inside, announcing that this was a robbery. Scott Smith had a knife, put the knife to our dad's side, and Pauley put the gun to our dad's head. The two men then proceeded to rip out phone cords, electrical wires, anything that they could pull out of the walls so that they could tie everybody up. Scott Smith took our father to the back area to where the kitchen and the cooler was at, and that was the last time our mom saw our father alive. He then came back out for Robert and tied him up and put both our father and Robert in a cooler, tied up with their hands and feet. Then they proceeded to have the three women, our mom, Sherry, and Linda, crawl on their hands and knees to the women's bathroom, made them strip and remove all their clothing, and began to tie them up with electrical cords around their necks, hands, and feet. Our mom and Sherry were tied back to back and left to die in the bathroom. There wasn't enough room in the bathroom, so they took Linda out and they hung her from a stage pole and left her to suffocate. Timothy Pauley, let me back up, I guess. At that point, Scott Smith left the tavern to go count the money that they had gotten from the tavern and from everybody that was inside that evening. Our dad was actually counting the money when the knock came, so the money was laying out on the bar counter. Scott Smith left the tavern, and Pauley then proceeded to walk through the tavern, believed our mom and Sherry and Linda were dead, went back through the tavern into the back cooler of the kitchen, opened up the cooler door and put a gun to our dad's head and Robert's head and pulled the trigger. And they left believing they left no survivors, that they had killed 5 people for about $1,300 to $1,500.
This wasn't just a robbery that went bad or wrong. It wasn't a quick robbery. It wasn't just 5 seconds. We estimate, based on the information that we're aware of, that they were in the tavern with the robbery at least an hour, possibly 2. This was Mom, Linda, and Sherry were tortured and humiliated by both Smith and Pauley that night. The act of brutality that was shown with no mercy or care for life from Pauley or Smith that night. It was the most heinous crime scene that the detectives came across and had to investigate. Pauley could have walked out that tavern that night, but he didn't. He made sure that when he walked through the tavern, he checked and there was no life. And when he left that night, he could have just walked out or rendered aid to our mom, Linda or Sherry, and he didn't. He executed 2 bound men who were locked in a cooler, who posed him no harm. It was a very gruesome crime scene that the detectives had to investigate, and it still haunts those detectives that are still alive to this day.
You asked kind of, do we feel as victims if we have been heard or seen? And the answer is absolutely no.
Positively no.
Positively no.
There's no doubt. There's never been a time where we've felt heard, not only by safety committees that we've attended and testified to try to help get legislation passed to give more transparency, to give victims more rights, to have people understand what our family is going through just to get justice for our mom, for Robert, for our dad, for Linda, for Sherry. The Indeterminate Sentencing Review Board has never made us feel heard. The first time we met with them, our backs were to the wall, and we didn't know why they kept looking behind us until we realized there was a clock behind us. And they kept looking at the clock, watching the time. We've never felt heard. We've continued to be victimized and re-victimized by the system, by Pauley, by Smith. They go through a trial or they take their plea deal, and then that's where victims and survivors have rights, where they're trying to make sure that they're testifying to make sure that the full sentence and the full law is on the criminals, that they're going to be sentenced to the full extent of the law. Once the trial is over, once the plea bargain is determined, the roles switch. The criminals, the murderers, those people now get all of the rights, and the victims and the survivors are forgotten and they're cast aside, and we're looked at
as a nuisance.
We're a nuisance. Yeah. We're a thorn in their side that just needs to go away. And then you've got people that are mercenaries or whatever they are that believe that the justice system is not meant, prison is not meant for them to be locked away and throw away the key, that they do deserve a second chance and to be rehabilitated. And there are some criminals that do deserve that second chance, but then there are some, you can't just put a blanket umbrella across it. There are some that don't deserve a second chance. Timothy Pauley and Scott Smith are one of those.
So I was going to ask you about during the time, and obviously that I can absolutely relate because I've been through this unfortunate system too. When crime victims who do not have a lawyer, so you have no legal representation because the prosecutors represent the interest of the state, not the crime victims. You don't get a say as far as what happens with plea bargains. Plea bargains, they are something that are done as far as trying to solve cases. They can be done for a number of reasons. When you guys were going through that situation, and was there a plea bargain that was accepted?
Yes. So Timothy Pauley pled guilty almost immediately. And so one of the things that we talk about, and that you have even talked about over the course of the years, is truth in sentencing. Mm-hmm. So both Timothy Pauley and Scott Smith were charged with aggravated first-degree robbery, aggravated 2 assaults of first-degree assault, and then first-degree murder 3 times for the death of our father, Robert and Linda. The prosecutors, during the plea deal and negotiations, they removed the word aggravated from all the charges. So it's all just first degree. For Timothy Pauley, for part of his plea, and this is something that was unbeknownst to our family and kind of the understanding of the plea deal, the robbery and the 2 counts of first-degree assault were completely removed from his sentence. He's not serving a single day for the robbery or the first-degree assault charges against our mom and Sherry. He's serving 3 life sentences for the murders of our father, Robert, and Linda. However, on top of that, 2 of those life sentences are being served concurrently, meaning he is only serving 2 life sentences for brutally murdering 3 people. That was his plea deal. He refused to testify against Smith, who pled innocent and had to go to trial, because he was afraid that if he testified, he'd be labeled as a snitch going into prison. So he was immediately looking at his best interest,
His protection.
his protection. And on top of that, he was afraid that if he pursued and testified against Smith, that there would be additional charges against him and or Smith. Mm-hmm. So he refused to essentially testify.
The truth has never come out about
the
what
truth
happened
has
that
never
night.
come out. So again, we have 2 defendants that have pointed the finger at each other from day one.
The frustrating part for me, I want to tag into what Angie just said. Pauley made an incredible deal. His plea, for whatever reason, represented by an amazing attorney, whatever the fact, we don't know. He should have remained in prison and accepted that deal and let it be and understand with the heinous crime that he committed and the cold-blooded execution of our father and Robert. He should be thankful that he didn't get a rougher sentence, that the death sentence wasn't around at that time. He didn't. He's a calculating, manipulating mass murderer who's not taken responsibility for his actions that night. 10 years from the time the murders were committed, he started pleading and changing his story and wanting to be released and reduce his sentence.
So did he, if I'm remembering this right, did he say that he was made to do this, that he was forced to do this?
That is one of the excuses, correct.
Okay. And
He was influenced and felt that he had no other choice because of what Smith had done to, quote, the 3 women.
He felt that his life was in danger if he walked out of the tavern and didn't execute our father.
Who had the firearm?
Pauley, the entire time.
Right. So he had the firearm, which clearly would have given him the advantage. The control and the ability to be able to defend himself from anything, any threat that he would have faced. So I think that's fair, to particularly point that out.
We've tried to point that out numerous times to the board.
Right.
And to other people who want to say that he's rehabilitated, he's changed, and he's not.
So I want to bring you to the Sex Offender Policy Board, the ISRB board. They're the same. And going through that clemency process. Because obviously when you're the crime victim family or loved ones, and there's a plea bargain that they're already given, they're already getting a lighter sentence, and you go through this court process and they levy this sentence. Did you, at that day that happened, think that you would be facing what you are right now with him being released?
No.
My mom was promised both Smith and Pauley would spend the rest of their lives in prison, that she would never have to worry about them ever getting out or being released.
Who made that promise?
The prosecutor's attorney's
office.
And this is which prosecutor's office?
King County.
King County. So going through that clemency process with you, one of the things that stuck out in my mind was when Mr. Pauley was talking about him having post-traumatic stress. I'm not sure if you remember.
Oh,
we
yes,
remember.
we remember.
So the post-traumatic stress, and so why did he say that he had post-traumatic stress?
He claims or alleges that one of the reasons that he was not thinking clearly that evening was the fact that he had several months earlier been severely injured on the job and almost lost, I believe it's his left arm, and that he was in a bad place. He was drinking and doing drugs, and that he was going through the PTSD and not realizing it at that time what he had. And that was essentially an excuse for why he did not simply walk out of the tavern that evening.
He's changed his story numerous times.
Right. So one of the things I think that really caught my mind is while we were sitting through this clemency hearing, and he was talking about the events that happened that day, talking about the things that he did, after talking about having post-traumatic stress, it dawned on me that when I was listening to him talking about the things that he did to your family, to your friends, that where was the post-traumatic stress for that? For torturing innocent women, making them undress, hanging them in the fashion that he did, and watching that, tying up these the gentleman. And I remember him saying that when he shot the first one, that he felt bad. He didn't talk about post-traumatic stress with that, and he felt so bad that he turned right around and he shot the next one. How does that make you feel when you're considering him talking about post-traumatic stress and what his version of that is and what a rational other person would think about considering what he did to other individuals?
It doesn't make sense. Nobody in their right mind would be thinking that. Over the course of the years, he has had excuse after excuse for him pulling that trigger. He has not taken full accountability for pulling that trigger. And so the PTSD and every other excuse that he has been able to discuss or claim, allege in front of the ISRB is another attempt of him practicing and rehearsing to be able to be considered a model inmate and rehabilitated and a changed individual. And it does not connect. When you look at all the dots, you look at the totality of everything that he has done and what he hasn't done, it does not compute. It's not there.
Well, I can attest to that because I saw it. I saw the way that he reacted, and I watched that board. To my knowledge, there's no law enforcement that's on that board.
There's nobody there's not a single attorney on that board.
Yet
Correct.
they practice law
They're practicing law.
and make judgments without any law degree or founding to support it.
Right.
And they put victims through a continuous process of being re-victimized because they'll make a standing
They make a decision.
and make a decision, and it can't withstand an appeal process that Pauley has made. And if back in 2015, 2016, when this board went back and reviewed their original decision and the adjustments that they made to his sentencing to make it in alignment with the SRA, they added the 22 years because of the aggravating circumstances, because of the true evidence and what happened during that night. They finally looked at everything. They finally looked at the crime scene photos. They finally understood what had transpired that night.
They finally actually asked him
him
what transpired, pushed him on the fact that he was the person that had the firearm, not Smith, that he was in the tavern by himself when he walked through the entire tavern from the cooler to the bathrooms and back into the cooler and shot our father and Robert. They finally asked him those questions and he could not answer it, and turned around and essentially blamed everything on Smith. But because they did not do adequate findings with regards to their decision was not upheld within the courts, and it was reversed. And you went from having this indeterminate sentence where they added approximately 22 years, going back and just adding 5.
There's no justice. How does that make sense? It doesn't. And we, as victims and survivors, have no recourse. We can't file an appeal. We can't go back and say, wait a minute, this isn't right. We want the original sentence of the 22 years you added. We want that peace and that justice and that finality that he's finally going to serve the sentence he should be serving. We don't have rights. He does.
So what sort of help did you have during that process?
The help that we went to was we reached out to then Congressman Dave Reichert. Congressman Reichert was a first responder on the scene. He investigated the crime scene, carried out the bodies, transported them to the coroner's office. He interviewed Sherry, one of the surviving people with our mom. He was heavily involved, making sure that everything was done according to the book, that these 2 men were going to be caught. They were going to be brought to justice. We hadn't talked to him in many years. And when we reached out to him, we were essentially just asking for a letter explaining what he witnessed and what he experienced as a detective at that time, because he was a detective for King County at that time. And he said, let me see what I can do. And he actually gave us a voice that we did not have. He contacted then King County Prosecuting Attorney Dan Satterberg. Dan Satterberg's office did not have notice of what was happening with regards to Pauley or Smith, and for several other cases involving the ISRB, because the ISRB was not copying and notifying the prosecutor's office to have input into regards to these clemency or .100 hearings. So there was a complete lack of transparency across the board to victims, survivors, to the prosecutor's office. Nobody knew what was going on until that transpired.
Okay, and if I remember right, so you guys did not have a lawyer.
Correct.
Timothy Pauley had a lawyer.
Correct.
He's had several.
There was also somebody, I think that was a counselor or somebody that was also
With
there
Pauley?
On behalf
And that's
for
through
him.
DOC. That's
Right.
on staff, DOC counselor or facilitator at the prison or at Monroe.
Right. So there was a crime victims advocate
No,
that helped you?
no.
No.
No, you had
We
no.
have, so the ISRB has 5 members that serve on their board, and then they have what's called a victim liaison. The victim liaison is not a victim's advocate. This person is, or support. She is there just to communicate between the victim survivors and the board. She can't give us legal advice. She can't advise us of what to do. She can't, give us pointers or suggestions. She is just there to facilitate the communication between us and the board, because we are not allowed to have direct contact with the board unless we have a scheduled one-on-one meeting with the board.
Okay. So if you were going to make changes to this ISRB board, what would that look like to you?
First thing is that they need somebody on that board that actually knows how to practice law and write decisions that are thorough and applicable to the law. They also need to have a victim's advocate that actually can sit down and walk a victim survivor through this process, what it entails, what it looks like, what your rights are. When I say what your rights are, meaning that you have access to the records, that you have access to attend a hearing, that you have the right to submit written documents as well as sit down in front of this board and explain and express your concerns, your fears, everything, so that this board and your voice and your loved ones are heard.
I also feel that the board should have better representation in terms of who's on that board, because there's nobody on that board, in our opinion, my opinion, who's a true victim, who truly understands the perspective of a victim and what they go through and what their experiences are.
I'll never forget listening to a hearing several years ago before the Senate, where a former Senate representative indicated that victims, while our input is appreciated, we have too much emotion behind what we're testifying or what we're saying, because we're too close.
We're too close. We're too emotional.
We're too emotional. And that our concerns shouldn't have the same merit or same weight as the incarcerated individual or the offender, the rapist, the murderer, whoever, because they're the ones that are going through this process to be rehabilitated. That we should be focusing on them and not this victim who is basically being told you need to move on and go about your life. And yeah.
And how do you go on? How do you move on? We try. The way, in my opinion, the way I can heal, the way I can move on, is that there's truth in sentencing. That if you get a plea bargain and you're sentenced to life, then that's life. You already received a lenient sentence because you pled guilty. You should not be allowed to continue to be revisited every 5 years because you took a class or read a book, and have this board say, okay, you did well, we're going to reduce your sentence again and again. Families, survivors, victims, we deserve to have healing. We need closure. And the only way to have closure is to have truth in sentencing and to stop this insane process where if you don't speak up and don't attend these hearings, then you agree with the board or whatever decision they're going to do to reduce their sentence, or allow them to be out. But if you speak up and you voice what you're going through and what the experience was, you constantly are reliving everything. You never get a chance to heal. You never get a chance to take a deep breath and say, there's justice, I can live. My mom survived that night. She fought to make sure that Smith would go to jail and be sentenced. She testified. She was promised. A victim, a survivor, goes through hell. They shouldn't have to continue to go through hell again and again to make sure that person who violated them, who murdered their loved one or loved ones, stays behind bars. But because the criminals have more rights than the survivors and the victims, we are constantly re-victimized. And the system is broken, and that needs to be changed.
So one of the other things that because of what you're talking about right now, currently during this 2025 session, I am aware of a bill policy that literally says that if you are somebody that murdered 2 people or less, that you should be able to get out of jail earlier. Could any of us, I think, try to describe what the difference is between if somebody deliberately murders 2 people, 3 people, 5 people? Is that horror less? Is that loss?
No.
No, it's the same. It's the same. And when you're saying that, you're almost kind of dismissing those lives didn't matter.
Those lives didn't matter.
Those lives don't matter.
Well, that does come up. There was something that was said that I've heard in committee here, that these people are dead. They're dead. So forget about them. And they truly do not have any rights at that point, which is something I do not agree with. I don't think you lose rights because somebody took everything from you.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
It should be treated the same as if you were alive, in my opinion, because again, this was a living human being that didn't deserve to lose their life, to have their life taken from them the way that it was.
They're not going to get a second chance. So there are some crimes, there are some individuals that you cannot rehabilitate, that do not deserve a second chance, no matter how many books they read, how many classes they attend. There are some crimes that are that heinous. You can't rehabilitate a person who's capable of that. And Timothy Pauley and Scott Smith are one of those two people.
So what would you say to somebody that, because I've heard this said before too, that I'm a person who feels that everybody deserves a second chance. I choose that I believe that that person should be released. And I guess the thought that comes across my mind is, so how do you feel about that if that person turns around then and victimizes or kills somebody else? Where does that thought process come as far as saying that there's more value placed in allowing somebody like that, because we don't have a crystal ball to know. Now, I would argue that there are tests that can be done to show whether they do pose more of a threat, in some instances than others, to be able to look at, also based on what their past behavior has been. But how do you feel about that, saying that we place more value on giving somebody a second chance to possibly create a new victim or murder somebody else, versus how many times does somebody get a chance to affect, destroy, or end somebody else's life before society has a right to say, no, you are too dangerous, you need to be managed? What's your thoughts on that?
I'll just kind of start on the first aspect of that, as far as getting a second chance. These individuals are given a second chance because they are living their lives where they did not give that same opportunity or that same grace to their victims. So they are living a second life. The other aspect of this is when I step back and look at the life that both Pauley and Smith have had, it might not be the life that they envisioned, but they have a life. They took 3 people's lives and almost took 5. They have both received an education. They have both been married. One is still married. They both have children. These are all things that they took away from essentially 5 individuals. So they are receiving a second chance to better themselves and to do things within inside the prison system. And if you want to be a model inmate and make a difference inside there. Get to these younger generations and tell them, you don't want to be like me. You don't want to be stuck in this place for the rest of your life. Make better choices. Turn your life around. Do something. But then to say, okay, I've only killed 2 people, so I'm going to get a second chance to go back out into society where I don't have the coping mechanism to deal with real life anymore because I've been confined for 44, 45 years. But you're going to open up the door and say, go free, walk free, and I end up taking another life because I panicked or I don't know how to control my emotions, or I'm just truly an evil person and I manipulated this system. I think once is enough. That repeat behavior is where we would have to take a step back as society and say, what are we doing and what are we forcing on our society by letting individuals like these free to harm and do repeat offending crimes and actions.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Angie just said. One of the biggest things that always comes thrown back in our faces is he is rehabilitated. Pauley has made a difference. He's a changed person. He doesn't deserve to spend the rest of his life in prison. He wants to come out and be a contributing member of society. And to that I say, no, you lost that opportunity. My dad doesn't get to come back. Robert and Linda don't get to come back. When Pauley left that night, there were 5 people that were murdered. Linda, Dad, and Robert died that night. But my mom, she came home to us, but she was never the same. And Sherry was never the same. Our society needs to take a step back and understand that there are some people that you cannot rehabilitate. And if Pauley or Smith claim, and the supporters that they have said that we're being too harsh, we're too close, we're not understanding that he does deserve to come out, to that I say, I have to go to a cemetery to see my dad. Robert's mom fought and wrote letters until we don't know if she's still alive or not. But her son was only 22 years old.
22 years old.
He doesn't get to have his life. He didn't get to have a chance to finish his education. He didn't get a chance to have children or be married. Criminals, murderers, rapists get their second chance because they get to live. A taxpayer's money, an education, a marriage, children. If they want to make a difference and they're rehabilitated, they can do it behind bars. Victims and survivors deserve to have peace knowing that they get to go shopping and live their lives without having to look over their shoulders and fear that that person that destroyed their lives is out walking the street with them. The biggest thing that keeps coming back to us is Pauley's changed and he deserves a second chance. He isn't changed. And if he wants to make a second chance, he can do that behind bars and in prison where he belongs. We're the ones who have the life sentence. I deserve to be able to walk the street and not know that he's out there as well. He got that opportunity and now they want to give it to him even further by opening up the door and letting him walk and go live with family members.
Do you know where that's coming from? Have you heard of the Washington Way through DOC?
No.
Neither one of you. That seems to be more of what I see. Maybe afterwards we can talk about this too. Google it. If you Google it, Washington Way DOC, you will find that there will be some things that start to make sense to you as far as why things seem so upside down and inside out and so chaotic. This Washington Way is a Norway justice system that is being imposed on the people in Washington state. And one of the things that I noticed when I was looking at it, that it says that when somebody like Timothy Pauley and the other men commit a crime, that their punishment is going to court and that they go to prison to learn to be a better neighbor. So the goal in this particular Washington Way is one in which no matter what you do, there is intent on you getting out of jail. It does not matter how many people you murdered. It doesn't matter how heinous or gruesome it was. This particular justice system believes in letting people out no matter what.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are people that maybe qualify underneath that umbrella. But then there are other criminals that do not qualify for that. You cannot change that makeup. There's a
You can't change
disconnect.
evil.
You can't. And in our views, you've been in a room with Pauley. We've been in a room with Pauley. We've sat across from him. There is a complete disconnect in that man. And I can't call him a man. There's a complete disconnect in him. He doesn't have remorse.
I would agree.
He
I
doesn't
saw it.
show any remorse for what he did. And the fact that he can do it and be so nonchalant about it when he has conversations and attends hearings with the board, and that the board allows it.
They don't
question him. There's
There's no
no push. And he's incapable of answering questions or explaining anything. He's so rehearsed because that's all he's done, and that's all he's been expected to do.
Right.
And I can't imagine him being set free, opening up the doors and letting him walk out into society.
Right.
He's incapable of coping.
So that was one of the things when we were going through that clemency board situation. And I know that Dave Reichert was able to talk with Governor Inslee at the time and convince him that you're right, there are some individuals that should not ever be let out for society's best interest. I hear this term, in the interest of justice, when it comes to letting individuals like this out. And like you, I've sat back and thought, in the interest of justice for whom?
Right.
Because it's not for the betterment or the protection of society.
It's for the offender.
Right. So when Governor Inslee pulled back the decision from the ISRB board to release Timothy Pauley, that definitely had to have been, a relief to your family. I know it was a relief to me.
In 2022, what do you receive?
Mm-hmm.
It was a huge relief.
It's huge.
It was something that we were not anticipating. It's something that we did not expect.
We were hopeful.
We were hopeful.
My
You
mom,
always have hope.
Right, and my
You always
mom,
have hope.
yeah.
But it was completely unexpected. And when it happened, it was okay, maybe somebody did actually hear what we've been trying to say for the past 12 years. Maybe Governor Inslee finally heard and actually kind of peeled back some of the layers in the curtain and actually saw and heard and truly heard what was coming out of Pauley's mouth, and not having the same kind of reaction and kind of stepping back and saying, wow, there was nothing behind that apology. That was just words. There was nothing there. He was a blank canvas. It was like a robot reading that letter.
Mm-hmm.
It did.
I would agree. I would absolutely agree with that. I even wondered if it was him that wrote it.
Probably was, because he probably got an A on it, because that was his first thing that he mentioned to the board years ago, was that he wrote an apology letter for a class and he got an A. Again.
There's no connect in terms of what it is. I did this, I participated in a class, but there's no understanding.
Yeah, and so we knew after Inslee's decision that the board would have to reevaluate and figure out how do they address the concerns that were raised by Governor Inslee's, order. And so we've been kind of anticipating, having that next hearing and discussing what has Pauley done, what has he, what has he accomplished, what has he hasn't accomplished. Is he truly, is there something more to this individual than just this blank canvas, this just shell? And we were hoping to have that opportunity to meet with the board. It would have most likely been this coming August, September.
Did anybody reach out to you?
We received in September, I believe it was in September, we were notified that the board was going to be looking at his case again in this coming up August. and that they would be in contact with us. And then everything turned on January 15th, 16th.
So what happened on that day?
January, I'm going to say
It was the 15th.
on January 15th, which was essentially Governor Inslee's last day in office, he rescinded his order from May of 2022 and found Pauley parolable. Sent the order to the ISRB with instructions that essentially within 63 days they need to start processing Pauley to be released. That was on the 15th. On 16th, on Wednesday, January 16th, I received a telephone call from the ISRB, from the victim liaison, informing me that Governor Inslee had made this decision. The next day, we put our mom to rest. She passed away.
So it was, we were beyond devastated.
We
The
had,
fact that there was no communication
there was nothing.
from,
Inslee's office we know that Pauley and his attorney were communicating with Inslee's office as early as October of 2024. And when one of our biggest concerns that we talked about with Governor Inslee back in 2022 was the lack of transparency. He continued that lack of transparency by not contacting any of us with regards to him reviewing, even thinking about reconsidering his decision and paroling.
He has a history of doing that. He
when the governor
Yeah.
did that, we were part of a bill that had into law where we were standing with Governor Inslee. My mom, all of us were standing behind him as he signed a bill that there would be transparency, that victims and their families have rights, and that there wouldn't be things done behind closed doors like this decision was. It was the most cowardly act he did before he left office.
Right. Well, it happened with us with the Green River murders as well, and moving Gary Ridgway, no notice to our family or anything.
And what do you do as a victim or a survivor? It's like you want to go and scream and have the residents wake up and realize what's been going on. It's like, it's our family. It's what's happening to us specifically, but this can be your family next.
Oh, yeah.
It can be you guys next. Mm-hmm. And it's just wake up and realize we need to make a change. We as a society, we should have more rights than what's going on to the people that are in prison. They're getting all the rights and all the opportunities. And the fact that Inslee did that without communication, without notification via email or a phone call, anything from him or somebody in his office, or the board to notify us, heads up, Carrie didn't call us. We didn't get anything. It's another way of re-victimizing us and throwing salt in the wound that we don't matter, that our mom doesn't, that our mom and dad, that we don't matter. It's enough. We do matter. They matter. Their lives matter.
So we have a new governor now. If you had a message, I did get a chance to hear part of your interview with Brandy Cruz. So it is my understanding that somebody reached out to your family from Governor Ferguson's office. I don't know if he's talked to you, if you guys have something maybe set up to try to talk to him. If he were to see this, what would you want him to know? What would you want to say to him?
There's a lot we would want to say. I mean, essentially he would be, and he is, in fact, giving us the opportunity to speak with him. He's giving us the opportunity to voice our concerns, something his predecessor did not. So I am hopeful that he will hear our concerns and hear how this has impacted us and how, as victim survivors, that how we have been treated through the course of this process has been horrendous. It's been debilitating. It's been emotionally draining. that it just seems never ending to be told one thing and then have the rug completely pulled out from underneath you. To hopefully have him understand as a victim, when you are looking at a person who says that he is sorry for what he did, that he regrets what he did.
Those are the words. He regrets the harm he's caused our family.
That he can make statements that this was 5 seconds of my life and I can't change that, and I can't change how people might view, but it was only 5 seconds of my life.
I remember him saying that.
And I don't want to be remembered for just those 5 seconds. And I don't want to remember
for those 5 seconds. But for his actions, we would not be here. But for his actions, I would be not speaking with you tonight. And so, again, when we talk about him apologizing or saying he's sorry for what he did, what comes out of his mouth are just words. There's nothing behind it. It's just an empty shell. We've been trying to figure out how do we articulate that? Because when he read his letter to us during his hearing, it was just so cold. There was no emotion. There was no feeling. There was nothing behind it. It was like a robot just reading these words off of a page. And you can read a book, and if the author is a good writer, you're tearing up because you're being sucked into this story and the words on those pages.
You have feelings. You're going to have emotions. And
this man is incapable of expressing that. And that is not somebody that is rehabilitated, that is remorseful, or that has accepted accountability for what he does, because he has completely separated himself from that night. He believes his life has value, and that's what he has found. Well, by being incarcerated, his life has value. Our father, Robert, Linda, our mom, Sherry, their lives don't have value, but his does. Our lives have value as well. And again, we're just trying to hope and pray that Governor Ferguson truly listens and truly understands what victims and families go through.
Truly understand the magnitude of what happened on June 12, 1980. That it wasn't just a robbery that went bad. That it wasn't just 5 seconds. That we've been fighting for 12 years plus for justice. We have people that say he served enough time, that you can't send him away for prison forever. It'll never be enough for you. It'll never be enough to heal your wounds. Yes, there is. There is a chance to give healing for us. There is a chance for justice. We deserve that. People say, just give it up, just be done. It's too much. And it has taken its toll on us, both emotionally and physically. And I'm thankful that I have my sister who has been with me and our mom through this entire fight. Because there are times you just want to give up. Who in their freaking right mind wants to relive that nightmare over and over again? We sure as hell don't, but we're forced to because he has more rights, because he gets a chance to appeal, because he's been rehabilitated. We deserve rights. And I hope and pray that when we do meet with Governor Ferguson, that he can, like Angie said, peel back all of the layers with everything and understand we haven't put ourselves through hell because we are enjoying all of this and that we want to do this. We don't want to do this.
We're giving voice to the people that can't.
Exactly. Our dad no longer has a voice, but he has rights. He was an amazing father and friend and husband. And his voice is being spoken by us because he no longer can.
Our mom can no longer
So
express it.
So we will fight in the hopes that Governor Ferguson can see through everything and stop this.
I think you're two amazing ladies. I'm so sorry for everything your family's gone through, and condolences for your mom's passing. I know they both would be very proud of you, even though this is hard.
People don't understand how hard and people say, well, you're putting yourself through it. I've had somebody tell me that. It's like, I'm not putting myself through this. This isn't something that I want to do. If I don't speak up and give voice to Dad and Mom and Robert and Linda, then
And
who
all the
will?
other millions of
And-
people that are out there
and
that don't have a voice.
right, that don't have a voice, for all the other victims. And it's important for victims to have a say. And we understand how painful and difficult it is. And we don't want to have to be going through this. And we understand how some victims choose not to because it's too painful. That doesn't give the rights for these murderers, rapists, whatever crime they've committed to continue, for our representatives that are supposed to represent us, give those people in prison behind bars more rights than we are.
Yeah, it shouldn't discredit.
It should not discredit,
Yeah, it shouldn't be against a victim if they don't feel comfortable or don't want to relive these nightmares over and over again. It shouldn't discredit what brought them to that place to begin with. It shouldn't discredit what took place and what happened. That should never be forgotten. And I feel that our legislature, the bills that have been coming across over the last several years, it's like they want to erase what happened and focus on giving these individuals these, quote, second chances, and just push this aside and let's just, that's okay. We'll just focus on you for right now.
Don't talk about why you're in prison. Why are we here? We're here because of what happened. Whatever crime was committed, that's why the victims are there. That's why the criminal is there. There should be more time spent on why are we here. But you're not allowed to talk about that. Even when we're up here trying to testify, you get 2 minutes.
If that.
If that, a minute.
I mean, usually when it comes to these bills that come across, they hear from the individuals that are
supporting the
bills, or the person that is presenting the bills, and they go on and on and on and on, and then you get a couple people that are either for or against, and if it's a victim or a survivor or somebody that's opposed to the legislation, it's like, well, we appreciate you being here this evening or today to be here, but we're going to have to limit your time, so you now have only 2 minutes to speak.
It minimizes you.
It minimizes you. And that is not something that any victim or survivor should be forced to endure.
Yeah.
Because our voices do matter, and they should be heard. They should give as much credit as the individual that is pursuing and pushing through the legislation, because we're the ones that it impacts the most, not them.
I would agree with that. That's why you're here right now, is because you do represent that important voice. And that is one of the things that I have seen, whether it's listening to testimony here, going to the Washington State Penitentiary where they had the death chamber that was there. Everything is centered on the person that has committed the crime and cruel and unusual punishment to them. What is not considered is the actual the cruelty, the inhumanity of what happens to the victims on the receiving end of it. We don't get to hear the reports about what happened. We don't get to watch any videos. We do not see any crime scene videos, right? So it's like that part of it is missing. And that is constantly what it is that I think about, in the interest of justice, that there is balance, that there is fairness, that, you know, we are looking to try to rehabilitate the ones that we can, but also recognize that there are human predators that you are not going to change. And in that instance, then we need to, it is our job to make sure that we're paying attention to that and putting some healthy side guards in there so that our families and businesses and neighborhoods can go about their lives in peace and safety. Nobody's guaranteed at 100%, but Washington, boy, we have emerged as one of the most dangerous states in the nation now, and it's policy driven.
I was going to say, it can be changed.
It can be changed.
We're in the situation we are because of policies that have been put into law because criminals and prisoners and the inmates and supporters have been heard more than the victims and survivors have, and that's wrong.
Well, we're hoping that that is going to change today with interviews just like this, with more to come, because these are important voices that need to be heard. So thank you so much for
Thank you.
We appreciate the opportunity.
making
Very
it
much
an
appreciated.
effort to come here today to be heard.
Yeah,
We
thank you.
appreciate the opportunity.
Very
Thank you very
much
much,
so.
Representative
Yeah.
Graham.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate all your time.